I want to add my comments to this, right? There's a couple of things I want to make sure I'm clear with what you're saying, right? If you have any questions, please DM me and follow for more. One, first of all, accountability is accountability, right? There's no positive, negative. It depends how you approach it and what you want to accomplish with your team. Accountability is engagement and ownership of the behaviors you're looking for in order to meet the objective. Accountability is whether they own the thing. Now, a couple of things before I get into this and how you approach that. Now, your employee here is underperforming by how much? 10%? Easily correctable. 30, 50, 40, 50, I think it's a capability issue, right? Right? Then the other question is for how long? Now, the other issue that I see is overperforming. Employees should not overperform based on expectations. If you do this correctly, and I always talk about creating an activity list with usual expectations, if you're doing the math correctly, and this is where your management skills are very, very important. If you do the math correctly, you're not going to have employees overperforming like 150% or 200%. That doesn't happen if you do this correctly. Yeah, they're going to get to close to 100, 97, 98, 90, whatever it might be. But once they reach 100, then you've done the reasonable expectations incorrectly, meaning that your goals are too low, right? Your goals are too low for some employees, and this other employee, maybe those goals, again, maybe too difficult. Again, the other thing why having a activity list with reasonable expectations is important is to ask the question. Here's the questions I would ask. What's the mix of work? What is the reasonable expectation? How long has this employee been underperforming? And by how much? Because in this whole scenario, there's a lot of questions I would ask. The key thing, the key thing for me is like how long? How long has this been happening? If you're telling me that this has been happening for longer than 2 weeks, then guess what? This is not an employee issue. This is a management issue. Because remember, people don't get confused about what are employees' issues and what are management issues. If you have employees that are either underperforming or overperforming for a period of time, that means you're not taking action to correct it overall. Because here's the thing, and when I mean overperforming, guess what? Those employees are sandbagging. They're like, I got this, no big deal. And guess what happens with people that are sandbagging? They begin pacing work. The goals are too low. So what do? They're not going to tell you, but you're actually you're recognizing them for overperforming. Great, let's overperform. When in reality is that you didn't do the due diligence in understanding what the activities are to set the right reasonable expectations, to set the right plan and the right goals. So this whole scenario, I have a lot of questions about, but the key thing that you're asking about, how do you approach it? Like anything else, if you look at my last video, I talk about setting this up. You've got to set everything up correctly. Roles and responsibility, reasonable expectations that I just talked about, training, planning, goals, KPIs, and metrics. If you set this up correctly, then that conversation is really simple. You're asking the employee, okay, I've met with you. We discussed all those different things that I said. And by all means, whenever I said all those different things, you're engaging employees so they can say, I agree with you, boss. Roles and responsibility, just make sure you engage with them. Just watch my other video. It explained in detail what I mean. But when you get to a point where you're having conversations, you're like, hey, we all agree. Do you remember those conversations we had about roles and responsibility and planning, all that? We both agreed with it because I definitely included you on those. Do you agree with that? You're like, yeah, I agree. Okay. So what is it about X that you're having challenges with, or why is it that you're not meeting those expectations? And let them answer. You've got to let employees answer, not fill in the gap, because in Vince's example, he does all the talking, where you shouldn't be doing all the talking. You should be asking questions, because the key thing you want employees to leave that conversation with is say, my boss, I own it. My boss doesn't own it. They're not blaming anybody else. They're blaming themselves, and they've got a plan, and they've got to go execute the plan to meet the expectations. That is the goal of the meeting. to them understanding what accountability is. They've got to own it. Remember what I said about accountability, engagement, and ownership, right? For the right behaviors to meet the objectives of the organization. So again, how you approach it, you've got to do all the work up front. And the worst thing you can do, like I said, if they are surprised when you bring this up, shame on you for not doing it earlier. So again,